All right, let's talk about something that sounds, well, completely crazy. We're going to dig into a Nobel Prize-winning economic theory that asks a wild question. What if recessions aren't bad? What if they're actually a sign of a healthy economy doing exactly what it's supposed to do? It's a radical idea, and we're about to break it all down.
So let's just start with that big question right there. Are recessions a bad thing? I mean, for pretty much everyone, right? The answer is a big, fat yes. We think of lost jobs, businesses shutting down, just widespread pain. For the better part of a century, the entire goal of economic policy has been to fight recessions, to smooth them out, to make them disappear. But what if that's the wrong way to think about them?
For decades, the dominant view was crystal clear. A recession was like a sickness in the economic body. It was a malfunction, a problem that needed a cure. And that cure usually involved the government stepping in to fix things. And this right here, this is the classic Keynesian perspective that really shaped everything after World War II. The story goes something like this. For whatever reason, people and businesses get spooked, and they just stop spending. Demand tanks, and the whole economy grinds to a halt. This leads to what's called involuntary unemployment. People who are desperate for a job just can't find one. The solution? Simple. The government needs to jumpstart demand with spending. This was the playbook, the absolute orthodoxy. Until the 1970s, when something that wasn't supposed to happen, happened. Stagflation. You had high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. The old model couldn't really explain it, and that cracked the door open for some brand new and pretty wild ideas.
And right through that door walked a group of economists in the 1980s, who basically took that entire idea and flipped it on its head. They came forward with something that sounded, honestly, nuts. What if the so-called business cycle isn't a cycle of sickness and health at all?
And this quote from Edward Prescott, one of the key figures behind this new theory, really gets to the heart of it. He's saying, look, we've been thinking about this all wrong. We try to separate the economy's long-term growth from these short-term ups and downs. But what if they're not separate? What if they're two sides of the very same coin, driven by the exact same forces? And that brings us to the core definition of real business cycle theory, or RBC for short. It argues that booms and busts are not the economy breaking down. No. Instead, they are the economy's most efficient, most optimal, best possible reaction to real, tangible changes in its ability to produce stuff. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Okay, to really get this, let's picture the old model. Imagine the economy is cruising along on a nice, steady, upward path. Then, bam, a shock hits, say a financial crisis. It knocks the economy off that path, and the whole goal of policy is to shove it back onto that original trend line as fast as possible. The recession is just seen as a temporary blip.
Now the RBC view? A completely different ballgame. A shock doesn't just knock the economy off its path, it creates a new path. See, some research suggested that GDP acts more like a random walk. After a shock, the economy doesn't just snap back to the old trend. Nope. It starts a new trend from wherever it is now. That shock has permanently changed the economy's future.
Okay, so if these real shocks are the cause of everything, what in the world are they? This is the engine of the entire theory. And we're not talking about things like the money supply or consumer confidence. We're talking about real physical things that change our ability to produce.
So here are the main culprits. Think about a game-changing invention like the internet, or a sudden massive spike in oil prices like we saw in the 70s. You could also have wars, natural disasters that wipe out supply chains. These are all real events that directly mess with an economy's production capacity. They change the fundamental rules of the game.
But out of all of those, RBC theorists said there's one that's the undisputed heavyweight champion: total factor productivity, or TFP. The easiest way to think about TFP is like our economy's recipe book. It's how efficiently we combine our ingredients, capital and labor, to bake the economic pie. A great example is the assembly line. That was a huge TFP shock. Suddenly, the same number of workers and the same number of machines could churn out way more cars.
So just how important is this one little thing, TFP? Well, in their huge, groundbreaking paper, the economists Keynesian and Prescott ran the numbers, and what they found was an absolute bombshell. They figured out that random shocks to just this one thing, total factor productivity, could explain about 70% of all the ups and downs in the U.S. economy after World War II. 70%! In their world, productivity wasn't just part of the story, it was the main character.
Now, if you accept all of this,
if you believe that recessions are just the economy adjusting smartly to these real productivity shocks, then it leads you to a policy conclusion that is, to put it lightly, extremely controversial.
And this table just lays it all out, clear as day. Keynesians say recessions are caused by a lack of demand. RBC says it's real productivity shocks. Keynesians see unemployment as a terrible, involuntary social problem. RBC has a very different opinion on that. And the big one. Keynesians believe the government must step in to help. RBC theorists, they argue that government action is not just useless, it's probably going to make things even worse. And this is where a lot of people go, wait, what? This is maybe the most shocking part of the theory. In the RBC world, when a negative productivity shock hits, it makes sense for wages to dip a little bit. And rational workers seeing this decide, you know what? The pay isn't great right now. This is a good time to take a break. They choose leisure over work, planning to work more later when wages are better. So in this view, unemployment isn't a tragedy. It's an optimal, totally voluntary choice.
And this isn't just some abstract academic idea. Look at this quote from Prescott talking about the huge 2008 financial crisis. He argued that the best thing to do would have been benign neglect, to just leave it alone. He believed all the government bailouts and stimulus packages just got on the way of the economy's natural, efficient adjustment process.
So, as you can probably imagine, a theory that calls mass unemployment a voluntary choice and says we should do nothing during a massive crisis, yeah, it got a little bit of criticism. So let's look at the pushback and why, despite all that, this theory is still so important today.
Critics really honed in on a few key points. First off, this idea of a negative technology shock. What does that even mean? Do we suddenly just forget how to build things? Second, and this is a big one, is 25% unemployment during the Great Depression really millions of people deciding to take a long, voluntary vacation? To many, that sounds absurd. Third, real-world data just doesn't show a strong link between people's willingness to work and small changes in wages. And finally, the way these models were tested, a method called calibration, made it really hard for other economists to definitively prove them wrong.
But here's the crazy twist. Even though most economists today do not agree with its core conclusions about policy, the legacy of RBC theory is absolutely immense. Why? Because it forced the entire field of macroeconomics to get way more rigorous and mathematical. The cutting-edge modeling techniques that the RBC theorists invented are now the standard tools of the trade, used by basically everyone, even by the new Keynesian economists who completely disagree with them on what to do about recessions. And that brings us right back to where we started. Real business cycle theory, whether you love it or hate it, forces us to ask this really deep question. Are we right to think of recessions as a disease we have to cure with government medicine? Or are they just the natural, maybe even efficient, rhythm of a complex economy that's constantly adapting to a changing world? The debate is still raging, and it shapes every single major decision about the economy we all have to live in. Thanks so much for tuning in.